in this episode.
In the end, it ends up vindicating the shadow to that, the Antichrist to that, and that would be Donnie. I mean, that's just an interpretation, but it's something I thought of.
I think the real Antichrist in the movie is Drew Barrymore's acting.
Welcome! You're listening to PaleoCheeze Podcast, Episode 15, Part 2, Donnie Darko with Michael David Wilson.
So welcome to Part 2 of Episode, gosh, I don't even know what this is, 15, 16? I'm not 15. Sure.
Yeah.
Where Part 1, we hung out with Michael David Wilson, author, publisher, podcaster, the co-host of one of the co-hosts of This Is Horror. At the time, he was excited about, if you listen to our last episode, doing a landmark episode with Chuck Palahniuk. Man, I really struggle with his last name, Palahniuk. And by the power of the internet and procrastination and error, he's already done the interview with Chuck, and I listened to it, and it's absolutely fantastic. It's easily one of my favorite on there. If you have not heard it by now, definitely go check it out. There's some great writing advice, great stories. Michael's a great interviewer. Chuck is a great interviewee, one of the best. And I would encourage you to check that out. But for now, we are going to be discussing the 2001 film, Donnie Darko.
Mm-hmm.
As a reminder too, if you're listening right now, help give us some validation by subscribing or following or liking, etc. And if you really want to make us smile, you can visit Twitter, YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, and click all of the stuff that all the people click to make us happy and sleep at night, and it helps spread the word and about our tiny little podcast. So, but thanks again, Michael, for hanging out with us. You're all the way in Japan, and appreciate your time again.
Yeah, well, thank you for having me back. I mean, it would have been a really disastrous interview if you hadn't seen us. It was like, let's have the conversation and then analyze Donnie Darko.
Yeah.
But yeah, in Japan, morning again. It's the next day. It's kind of like time travel, which I suppose is appropriate for what we're talking about with Donnie Darko. So. Although the interesting thing about this movie is it's open to numerous interpretations, and I think there's a lot of arguments over whether people enjoyed the director's cut or not, because in the original there's a lot of ambiguity as to what's actually going on here. So is it time travel? Is it purely mental health? Is there something that's kind of a gray, murky area between the two? Is there another tangent universe? And then in the director's cut, Richard Kelly was like, well, here's all the answers to that. And it was a little less ambiguous.
That's what was that? Me. I looked up on Amazon Prime, and I saw that they had a director's cut. They had like 3 of them, because if you're sometimes you'll see multiple editions of the same movie and stuff. And sometimes if you subscribe to a specific channel, you may be able to watch it for free or with ads, which that's what I was able to do. But I saw a director's cut, and I'm like, oh yeah, man, for sure, I want to watch that. And when I went to go watch it, it said just watch list. You couldn't rent it. You couldn't anything. It was just there. And I said, no. Right. And so, yeah, so I didn't get to see, I haven't seen the director's cut.
Right.
So a brief synopsis of Donnie Darko. It's a strange, I don't know, drama. I don't know why I call it a horror movie. I guess it has horror elements about a mentally ill high schooler who sleepwalks his way through the future and back again while becoming obsessed with a bipedal bunny who tells him to commit suicide with an airplane engine. And it's directed and written by Richard Kelly. Stars Jake Gyllenhaal and his sister Maggie, and the ever sexy Patrick Swayze.
That was hilarious, by the way. That character is absolutely hilarious. The whole scene, that whole cunning vision thing, right? And it's every single thing that I remember, these kind of throwbacks to the 80s, you know, where a person turns their head, like they're looking in another direction, they turn their head, and then they start talking like, "Hi, how are you?" Or they walk around the corner, you know, they're in another room around the corner, and they come walking out, and they're just right away talking. And he was even talking far away, like like in a field, walking slowly toward the camera, talking, and he's really far away. Everything about it, I was like, this is hilarious.
Yeah, it was hilarious.
Yeah,
it was very it also reminded me of those, like when you're growing up at school and they bring the good guys in there to talk to you from some type of organization, like an anti-drug thing or anti-bullying thing, and they do some of the cheesiest stuff, and his character was hilarious, and that's probably why it was such a dark moment when you found out who he really was.
Yeah. And everybody liked him, so you didn't. I didn't anticipate it, you know. I mean, because all the teachers and all the ladies, and but it was funny, that little hint where they were like, it's so weird that he's single, you know, and they kind of dropped that idea that he's alone, right? And but it, you know, and it's curious as to what would make this guy, you know, why is he alone? What's going on with that? But dude, that was just, it was a stunning moment to realize what that was about and how you found out anyway.
Yeah.
You know? Yeah.
Our mutual friend Ryan sent me a picture of him standing in front of that big bull. He was on the set, but is
it a bull or a bulldog?
A bulldog. Did I say bull?
Yeah.
I meant to. Yeah, I never finished the word. Sorry.
Yeah.
I got distracted.
It was like a big bull statue. It's like he's in New York.
Bulldog. Yes.
Yeah.
No, but I remember the first time I saw it, you know, it was several years ago, probably when it first came out. And I remember having the same reaction then that I did when I rewatched it recently. And that was that I just knew immediately that I was just the atmosphere and everything about it. It's already like got these riddles in the first like 30 seconds. This kid's waking up, you know, on the road, and he's looking around, and then he turns and he's got the smile on his face. And it's just like, just that feel alone. And then immediately with the the scene with his family at dinner and getting, you know, the dialogue between him and his sister is just hilarious, man. And he's so snarky and sarcastic, and right away I just was like, it was like charming, you know. I liked him right away.
It's a great lesson in conflict to begin with as well, in terms of all that dialogue in the family setting, because you've of course got the political tension between the children and their parents. So you've got the parents that are Republican voting, kind of toe the line, let's keep things as they are. And we've got the sister in particular who wants to change and to make things for the better in terms of how she perceives the world. And then you've also got the conflict between Donnie and his sister, who he tells to go suck a fuck. We can debate how you would do that. And you've also got the younger sister, so the other sister, who, you know, is kind of privy to all of this, and just like seeing the parents almost navigate their parenting and their different approaches to the 3 children they have. And I mean, it is a masterclass in terms of how to put a script and to put a story together.
Yeah. And I think what I like about the character too was he was saying things that I think a lot of us would love to have been able to say, like in school when he calls the guy the Antichrist. And he's just so blatant. You know, he says stuff that in whether it be to his parents or his you know, soon to be girlfriend or whatever, just like there's no filter. And so we kind of like in some of those scenes we kind of like live vicariously through him, and and cheer for him when he says something outrageous and rude. There was a scene in the classroom later on where in Jeremiah, it reminded me so much of you and me. Like when he's arguing in the classroom with a teacher about how humans are much more complex than just fear and love.
Mm-hmm.
And it reminded me a lot of myself in the way that, like, I think I overthink things. I think way too much. And I constantly considering different perspectives, different angles. And it reminded me of you because you dare to like present a different ideology on things sometimes, eventually getting yourself into trouble, whether it be getting kicked out of school or fired or whatever.
Oh, yeah.
Both of those reminded a little bit of both of us.
And always based on nuance. Always based on nuance. You notice it there in, I didn't see myself in that, but I can appreciate it. I'm grateful. In fact, I take it as a compliment. And it's true. It's just factually, historically true in my scenario. But yeah, I've been in those conversations where people make these extreme either ors, and I'm also the emotional kid, right? The bipolar guy that everybody kind of looks at and is like, that guy's he's an emotional guy, but he's also pretty clever, pretty smart, and getting in conversations with teachers, right, and people in authority all the time that are trying to make it as if it's a simple either or, right? And to say, look, it's deeper than that. There's a whole spectrum here. And I liked in the symbolism of that scene where they had fear on one side of the line and love on the other side, that it's a line and it's just a big, huge empty space. So even visually, you could say, don't you see how there's a whole bunch of stuff between that? And so I'm with you, man. I agree.
There was one scene in particular too that, and when I looked back, I saw that character and maybe even some other ones. And you guys might not, if we were all watching the movie right now, then you might pick up on this. But just reflecting on it might be a little difficult for you to pick up on. But when that crazy woman who's just like, I don't know what you'd call her, like uber ultra conservative woman that ran the she was like the old lady. I can't remember what her job was in the school. She was a teacher of some sort. Actually, I think she may have been the teacher we're talking about. But there's a scene where she goes up to the door, Donnie Darko's mom, and talking to her mom, and trying to convince her to go to be the chaperone and stuff.
Yeah.
In that moment, her dialogue and her reaction was so much like a David Lynch character. And like I said, I don't know if you can like remember it that well. I almost didn't pick up on that, but it remind his characters, especially in Twin Peaks. Well, in a lot of his movies, Wild at Heart, where they have such over exaggerated reactions to things, and they're so overly emotional about stuff, and just who she was and the way she talked and the way she acted reminded me big time of a Lynchian character.
And absurd amounts of discomfort. Like when she stood up in the middle of the school meeting, right, about the flooding, and she just turns it into an opportunity to complain about other things and makes herself, well, I'm the only person. I transcend all of this because I'm both a teacher and a parent. So I transcend this, which gives me some kind of special privilege, and I thought it was kind of funny about her in that, on the one hand, it doesn't make any sense that a very conservative-y person, and I'm saying this as a conservative-y guy, right? But that a conservative-y person would fall on the, peace and love, hippie, put a flower in your ear side of the love and fear dialectic, right? To say like, it's just about love. Like that's not ordinarily something that someone who's also loving Dan Quayle and stuff like that they would fall on that side if you had that paradigm, right? And so I thought she was kind of but at the same time, you also can see historically that it actually makes a little bit of sense, because there was a phase where it was kind of becoming that, even within the, what would later become things like seeker sensitivity movements and stuff like that in conservative circles, that were more about tolerance, embracing, overcoming the fear and stuff like that. So I thought it was an interesting snapshot into not only the psychology of someone with a certain set of political and religious beliefs, but also that same exact thing in the 80s. Right. And I think he did a good job. I was fascinated by it, but I didn't put it together with a Lynchian thing. But now that you've said it, that scene at the door, yeah, for sure. Yeah. Because it was awkward, the hyper emotionalism that she was experiencing. Everything was on the line. Like it was this huge, massive thing, and even the kind of way that she was rude at the door to say, of all the moms, I wouldn't have ever thought of even asking you.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, that was like a very uncomfortable moment, between the two of them. So yeah, definitely Lynchian in that way.
Michael, have you seen the director's cut?
So I haven't seen the director's cut straight through, but what I did do was I looked up all the scenes that are added into the director's cut, and so watched them to get an idea. And it's interesting too, because like a lot of people prefer the original because they feel that the ambiguity is one of the things that makes it great, and the fact that it can be open to interpretation. But the director's cut is pretty much saying, that this is time travel, the tangent universe is real. And there's even a line where Donnie's therapist reveals that his medication is just all placebos. So
what? That would be like a ruining thing. I'd be like, what? Are you serious? You're gonna reveal that?
Yeah. So I think as well, like reading up on and learning about the director's cut, I thought, well, I'd rather not watch it all the way through, and I'd like to have the original film more vivid in my mind. I thought particularly for this conversation, because it just makes it less interesting to analyze if it's like, well, yeah, that's what happened. So we can put a line underneath that. And
you've been woke, Michael. It's too late to turn back now.
Yeah. But it is interesting that you mentioned the line about Jim Cunningham being the Antichrist. And I mean, one of the interpretations of Donnie Darko is that Donnie is a kind of Christ-like figure. It's the Christ narrative.
He's a martyr, yeah.
And I mean, Jim Cunningham he effectively presents Donnie with the three temptations, but as the teenage rebel figure rather than, like Jesus going away from the temptations. It's almost like a checklist. So that there's the sex before marriage, there's the alcohol, there's the drugs, and he's lapping it all up. And before he has died as the martyr, he has completed the temptations to fulfill his destiny. But it is interesting too, just how you've got the figure, the teacher and the parent whose name is escaping me, who just views the world in such a simplistic way. You've got fear and you've got love. And like you said before, the reason that this resonates particularly with teenagers and young people is because Donnie is saying everything we've wanted to say. It's almost like a kind of teenage fantasy standing up to absurd authority and kind of pointing out, like, can you not see how ridiculous this is? And I mean, I think the scene at the door where Jim Cunningham has been revealed to be a pedophile, but she's so adamant that she wants to defend him that instead of accepting that in the face of pretty damning evidence, she's like, no, I'm going to defend him. I'm going to have to try and find out what's happened. He's been set up. Because I think if she admits that actually, no, he is a bad person, he is a pedophile, then what else is she now going to have to question? How is it going to alter her worldview, particularly when, I mean, in a sense, she has put him on a pedestal like a Christ figure. She's taken his preachings about fear and love and this way to live your life, and she's decided that she's going to teach it. And the absurdity of her getting the teacher played by Drew Barrymore fired for teaching Graham Greene, when there's far more danger in teaching the teachings of Jim Cunningham, is something that is very kind of clear and deliberate. And the thing I love about this film is that everything is intentional. There's not a line or a scene that is wasted or is filler. It all serves for tension and conflict. And I think that is why it stood up so well. Although, interestingly, I don't know how much you're aware of the kind of origin story and the cinematic release, but it didn't do well on its first release because it came out not too long after Columbine, when that was very much in the zeitgeist. And you've obviously got Donnie casually shooting a gun, so that didn't go down too well with people having this mentally disturbed dude shooting and he's at a school, and you know that could end badly. And then also it came out very close to, maybe even a week after, the Twin Towers had gone down. So you're opening with this kind of foreign object from an aeroplane. Is it like a jet engine going into a building? So in terms of accidentally having things that are people are going to be reactive, it almost had a checkbox for the time. But I think because of the universal themes and the way that this just speaks not only to all teenagers, but to all rebels, to all people that have felt a little bit different and questioned the way in which we have these hierarchies and people try and neatly put things into good and bad boxes. These are some of the reasons that it has endured. I think as well because it's a dark thriller. It's a horror tangential film. And so you've got these evocative images and very difficult to kind of come up with concrete answers. But I mean, if you look at the figure of Frank, Frank in the bunny costume is iconic. It's one of the kind of images from noughties cinema. I mean, there aren't many others that are so famous.
Mm-hmm.
It's Baphomet-esque. And you said so many things. I was typing some of the stuff down. I'm like, man, you brought up so many great points. But I think one thing, that I want to throw out there is like, and I don't want to get too esoteric about it and technical, but a lot of, talking about the Jesus figure, you said Cunningham is kind of like a Jesus figure too. I would venture to say that he is, in this story, he is, in the writer's intent, the Jesus figure. And he has followers that are ecstatic to the point where, if you think about the door scene again, she's not only giving up what she said that she's worked for basically her whole daughter's life, right? She's been working. We've worked for years for this and all of this. It's like this amazing thing. It's a once in a lifetime thing. And she's going to sacrifice it, not just because she has to go to, what did she say, the trial? She's going to go to the court basically, but also that she's not just going to support him, but she's organizing a group of support. Yeah. And so if you're, because I think when you see two Jesus-like figures in this, and I mentioned this about the Antichrist, I think that Donnie is a Gnostic character. I think he's an Antichrist character in the sense of like the Overman, right? Nietzsche's superhero, godlike guy who's dealing with fate. And that comes out in the very, very, very beginning with the first song. And I made sure to I actually saw this quoted on a website too. over at Jay's analysis. I was glad to see that. I said I noticed that too. Yeah, the opening scene has the song "The Killing Moon," and it begins by fate up against your will. He will wait until you give yourself to him. And so you're talking, and there's themes in it about predestination, right? And are we programmed? Can we even the kind of watery tube-like things that are coming out of the bodies are leading the way in actions that those people think they are doing of their own volition.
Yeah.
Right. And so
like predestination.
Like predestination, yes. And he's taking this position. It's an argument about predestination and free will. And even the conversations about, well, why are you wearing that suit? Why are you wearing that man skin kind of thing? They are vessels. They're just vessels, and they're kind of conduits of this thing. And the idea that Cunningham is the Jesus figure and he's the Antichrist figure, right? Projecting, in fact, on the Jesus figure. But I think the reason why that makes sense, and it's a hint in the movie, is that The Last Temptation of Christ was playing at the theater.
Yeah.
And that movie is a Gnostic movie. It's based on the Gnostic doctrine that our story of Jesus is not real, and that Jesus actually was with, Mary Magdalene, or had some kids and stuff. He really didn't die on the cross, kind of a thing. And so that idea is there. So you see, of all the movies they chose, that's one of them. Okay. And you look at the symbolism and the way that the religious people respond, and all the religious people in the institution of the Catholic school were fanatical about him and totally devastated, which was hilarious, where they're super pumped, right? And they're like all pumped, and they're celebrating inside of the principal's office. And then that lady comes in with a totally devastated face and shows them the front page very slowly. And you just see devastation wipe across, just all over their faces, and their reactions to learning the truth about their Christ figure, right? Learning the truth about him and seeing the darkness in, once it's been burned down, you see that there's wickedness in there. And in the end, it ends up vindicating the shadow to that, the Antichrist to that, and that would be Donnie. I mean, that's just an interpretation, but it's something I thought of. I
think the real Antichrist in the movie is Drew Barrymore's acting. It was bad, man. She's one of those actresses or actors that I can't take them in a serious film. She's great in something like what's that show I love so much? Is it the San Clarita Diet? Is that what it's called?
Yeah,
I love that show. She's great in that show. And she's been great in a couple comedies, but she has that smirk on her face that, no fault of her own. It's just there. And I just thought she was horrible. Horrible. I might be in the minority here, but
you say too, Michael, you bring up the idea that I think you're maybe in the majority. I think she's one of those things, like she's nostalgic though, in a way, and this is an 80s throwback. So I mean, it's kind of fitting that she's in there, and Swayze too. I mean, it's like these are iconic figures, from that time. But you were saying that, the timing of it, Chad, you said, wow, think of the timing. And I thought, when would actually be a good time for that? I mean, if you thought, well, what if it came out in, let's say, 2010 or 2014? I mean, there is fat shaming in there, right? There is bullying, where he's like, look, if you really want to defend yourself, you should take a karate class and kick him in the balls, kind of thing. And a lot of people would go, whoa, and they'd freak out. So I think that it's brilliant in that it like the 80s kind of attacks the sensibilities of political correctness. And I think that is one of its strengths, but also maybe in a marketing sense, maybe one of its weaknesses, and that it didn't do so hot first time around. But it's a cult classic, so it's not like nobody can really complain,
Right. Do you think if there were to be, a similar 80s throwback film now, that people would have to be more mindful, or perhaps even censor what is authentic playground bullying in the 80s, but just would be unacceptable today, like kind of encouraging to kick him in the balls, and also, you know, telling that girl, go back to China, bitch. It's like today, you'd be like, fucking hell, I can't believe.
Yeah.
Okay,
I
now
can't
that
believe
they
that they've
might
said
they
that.
might cut, but
Yeah.
it depends on who's putting out the film. Hollywood has lost its balls, and they don't like to take chances. This is why we're getting remakes. This is why we get sequels, because they don't want to. They want a sure thing. So if something is successful, that's there's gonna be a sequel to it, most likely. And then of course the remakes, some of which are a joy to see, and some of them are completely unnecessary and insulting. But an indie movie, absolutely, an indie movie. I mean, they don't hold that kind of stuff back. But the China thing, that's really pushing it, I think, because of the world we're in right now.
Right. Yeah.
I think particularly now, with COVID, and you've got
that's what
people,
I'm saying.
Yeah.
You go back to China. Yeah. Right. Yeah.
Any I was just watching the Joe Rogan podcast with David Cho on it. I don't know if you guys watch the show or know who he is, but he's from Korea, and he talked about a couple times. He talked about how he was told that when he was a child, to go back where you come from. And then he was never told again for years and years until recently. He was told twice. And this guy's 44. Really cool dude. He broke down on the show about it. He was crying. It hurt his feelings bad. And so I thought about it, and I thought, not to say I'm any kind of saint. Lord knows I've done my fair share of whatever, just like anybody else, saying mean things or doing mean things. We've all done it. That's not one thing that I've really said, because I don't understand it, and I don't see any place for it. I go back where you came from. I can't think of anything more hurtful, really. It's
a pretty big one. I've seen, and I can say it on not a personal level. I've talked about this on my own podcast one time, about how my wife, she's half Korean. Her mom was born and raised in Korea, and her mom has experienced that a lot in the past. It's been a long time with her. Super thick accent, I mean, even when she says sandwiches, it's sandwichy and stuff. She actually learned English by watching soap operas and things like that. So that is how she learned. And so, but my wife, so dad's Caucasian, white guy, mom's Korean. So my wife is this, she's multiracial, and it's interesting because she spent a couple years in Germany when she was really little, and she's got some pictures, but the rest of her life is in America, and her mom worked really hard to integrate. So, I mean, to a fault, in fact, where she went extreme and didn't really practice speaking Korean with other Korean people. They didn't go to Korean events or with Korean churches and stuff like that. They just tried to blend in and to just be American. Right. And so my wife is as American as apple pie, or General Tao's chicken, which is really American. I mean, you should watch a TED Talk about it. But like, the thing is that she's been told, and I've watched my wife talk about these things and cry. I mean, it's heartbreaking. I've cried with her. I mean, just held her, because that's something that's really, really painful. So saying stuff like that, I think most people would just self-censor that. But there are other things from the 80s, other words, the F word that rhymes with bag, right? Like that's another word that people, or maggot, there's a fear to say that, even though it's applicable to the time. And so, that's something, but it's something that a society, once it goes through that, and you start to see that word go into disrepute, right? The debate really, it becomes not, can you just say that loosely, but in what context can it be said at all? And if you can't say it in a situation like, like that guy was obviously a bully, he was obviously a terrible person, right? Saying go back. So, I mean, it makes him look even worse. That's a valid point, right? And that it definitely doesn't shine good on him. And not many people go, I want to be that guy, And so, but I don't know. I think in modern times, nowadays, if a movie like that, I think it would be tamer on certain things, right? Distinctive marks from the 80s even.
Yeah. And I think as well, I mean, because I did think about this, and particularly, to write authentic stories, but to also be mindful of, not only sensitivities, but repercussions. And I think if you're going to use something that's homophobic or xenophobic or any other phobic, you've got to make sure that the story justifies it, and really there's no other way that you can convey or get across the same thing without using it. So if you can do it in a way and achieve exactly what you wanted to without using that language or those actions or whatever it is, then it's probably better to do that. I think the more offensive something is, the more you've got to kind of justify it so that it's not gratuitous. And so, I mean, there are stories like Joe R. Lansdale's the night they missed a horror show, where actually in the context of that story, the language is necessary. But if it isn't, then I think particularly in 2020, you're going to be hard pushed to use it. I mean, I've got a character in The Girl in the Video who's completely abhorrent and objectifies Japanese women. He's every sort of phobic that you could imagine, but it is kind of necessary to portray the type of guy he is. But yeah, it's like when you tell a joke, when you're a comedian, I don't think there's any subject matter that you can absolutely say you cannot make a joke with that subject matter. But the more sensitive it is, the more, you better make sure that joke is poking fun at the abhorrent person and not actually, poking fun at whatever the act is and essentially making fun of the victim. You've got to make sure it's making fun of the perpetrator. And it's a difficult thing to balance. And it's interesting because as we were talking, I was thinking, if this is what's required to make it authentic, then you should be free to have that line in the movie. But then as you were talking about the racial abuse that your wife and her mother has suffered, it actually made me rethink the lines in which I was going, because I thought this is a film that has a huge teenage audience. And as teenagers, what do we often do? We echo lines from our favorite films because we think it's funny. So unfortunately, if you've got a bully saying go back to China, you're a 15-year-old dumbass. You're maybe now going to say that to Chinese people within your school. So now you've got that responsibility. And
plus you've got it coming from the mouth.
That makes it tougher, What was that, Jad?
Plus you've got it coming from that particular line of dialogue is coming from the mouth of somebody who is not really one of the antagonists in the movie. He wasn't he wasn't one of the, he was one of Donnie's friends, one of his friends from school rather than the bully. I just toyed around with I'm writing something with somebody right now, and I wrote a line of dialogue using the word that rhymes with maggot out of the mouth of a 14-year-old bully who is basically telling this new kid at school to use the stall instead of the urinal next to him. The dialogue is 100% applicable, big time. For the age, for the message he's trying to convey, because he's not confident in his own masculinity to have another kid take a piss next to him. So, and I sent the dialogue, and I was like, dude, what do you think? Can we get away with this? Because I don't agree with censorship. I'm a huge Lansdale fan. Joe is definitely doesn't agree with it. And the man, if you know anything about Joe, he's the farthest thing from racist. But his stories, and you mentioned the night Missed the Horror Show, you could have included a very long list of Joe Lansdale work that uses that particular word that we both know.
Paradise Sky. Paradise Sky. It's like, but it's the time frame too. And you got to think maybe it's on a scale too, like if you're making a book and it's got Hitler and Nazis, I mean, there's a bunch of words I won't even say on here that they would use, or if you have Klansmen, a Klansman would use words that we won't say here, right? Like the N-word and other things, abhorrent, but it would be applicable to them. Now, someone who's a bully, that could be argued, I think. In fact, it's hard if the debate is that's so bad you shouldn't say it, then it almost seems like it's just by its own definition then applicable to the person who's a terrible, rotten person. And that like maybe there's other words they could say, you freak, but it would lack the intensity of words that are otherwise no-goes. Like, don't say that. And it kind of brings it forces it. It's kind of, I think people maybe would benefit from watching Steven Pinker. He's a Harvard professor, and he does this hilarious video on bad words. And he has a section there on all the different words that we use for poop, right? And he goes through and he's describing it, and he says, it'd be really terrible if you told your little baby, hey, you need to go take a shit over there. Or if the doctor said that, well, you need to take this shit bag and do that. Or, and on the other hand, if the doctor said, well, this is where you put the doo-doo, like that would be inappropriate too. So there's the whole spectrum. Dude, I'm telling you, you have to see it. It's like up there in my mind. It's up there with like George Carlin's thing about words you don't say and stuff like that. It's classic, but
but leaving that stuff out, you should be able to tell as a reader, and you certainly bite your tongue as a writer. You should be able to tell as a reader whether something is being gratuitous or not. If one of us were to write a book that we're trying to show a bully, and he's not even a racist. He's just a bully, and he's talking to somebody, doesn't matter if they're black or white or Mexican or whatever, and he uses the N-word. That just doesn't make sense. You're just using the N-word because you know that it's a bad word. If we're but to me, without adding some of those things, I don't think that you should add them liberally. Excuse me, but liberally, but like it'd be like writing it's like a prison book or watching a prison film, and nobody cusses, nobody has tattoos, and nobody's raping anybody, it's like, and everybody is just like, I mean, we've never been to prison, but we've seen enough to, documentaries and TV shows and stories to know what goes on there and how bad it can get. But to have it portrayed in a different light, just for the sake of potentially hurting someone's feelings, I don't agree with it. But at the same time, like I said, I do agree with being very wise and cautious about it.
I think it's interesting too, the idea of not only being able to use that, and as you were talking, I was thinking about it, man, like it's not just examples where you're trying to show that somebody is a bad person, but also you can think of an example. I thought of an example of where it was showing how someone or a group of people, right, or an entire civilization at that point was stupid, and that's idiocracy. Idiocracy uses that words like that, right? But the whole idea is that it's an idiocracy. We're at a point where they're not, so they're even talking, dumb. They're talking stupid. They're using terrible language, and so it kind of adds to the point of that, and so I can imagine a number of different contexts wherein language that is currently with our mores right now taboo, that it would make sense. It would be debated, kind of like Dave Chappelle's rape joke. I mean, that was on his Netflix special, and that was hotly debated. People debated whether or not it was funny or not, talking about, is there something, and that is probably the most taboo thing for a comedian is, I mean, if you don't do it right, you are the worst person in the world. Like you are done, dude, forever. And even if you did it right, you might be done forever. But you're Dave Chappelle, and so you and people can debate whether or not it was a legitimate thing. But it just goes to show that there's a whole bunch of different contexts wherein very taboo things, especially with writing, movies, comedy, stuff like that, where that may be acceptable, not to be praised, but to be understood, and to create the character that you're in fact wanting to create.
I got to be honest, man. While you're sitting there talking and you brought up the word stupid, it made me think of the word retard or retarded. And I'm thinking to myself, well, I could easily find a different word. I'm not going to use that word. I wouldn't use that word. But I'm drawing my own line. Because if I'm going to use the maggot word, why can't I use the other one? So I will admit to not having an answer, I guess. I think we all draw our personal lines on various things, because it's not fair to be able to, when I think of you, if I were to use the retard, I instantly think of someone this is their life, and I think of the parents, mainly the parents, because I think someone who is, somebody that, I mean, back in the day, we used to use that word all the time in the 70s and 80s. It was just all the time. But as a parent, it's heartbreaking to have your child called anything. Like I would think that I'm trying to think of an example. But like, if you have an overweight child, or if you have Jeremiah, if you had a Korean child, and the child was clearly Korean, okay, and you heard somebody say that to your child, it would probably crush you more than it would your child.
I will say this, because we've talked about this privately before. My brother is he was in a car accident with closed head injury, and my parents and a lot of other parents that we knew, and there were some, I don't want to portray it like it's just a one-sided thing. There were differences of opinion, but a significant number of those that I was around, and we were around a lot, we were part of organizations and stuff, they were kind of surprised by the way that society at large, and a lot of people who had a curious interest in it, it was more like, about a speech code than it was about somebody they knew, or that they used it in a way that was intentionally thinking in their head of somebody with a disability, things like that. But that a lot of them, they say, yeah, my son is mentally retarded. Or even going to the doctors. A nurse recently asked us about it and used the phrase mentally retarded. And she goes, yeah, it's right here. It's on the screen. It's our medical term for it. And so but again, that might play into the whole idea of the difference between a fecal sample and a shit bag, right? Yeah. That might be, or crap, and that there's shades of that. Yeah.
It's because of the overuse of the word. Because when you normally hear that word, it's not in good context. It's not in appropriate context. It's not for the context that what it really is. I would think that a large majority of the times that word retarded comes out of someone's mouth, it is has nothing to do with a legitimate medical condition. So that it's one of those words that's been hijacked, and now because of that, it sounds offensive when used in when used appropriately. Is that
Michael, what
you're
do you
saying?
think? What do you think about this? Let me throw this out there from Michael, because I've talked to you privately about this. But I want Michael's opinion. What do you think about, like, for example, did I say stupid or dumb a little while ago?
I think
I may
you
have
said stupid.
I said stupid. My first thought was dumb, and I think I paused and I ended up saying stupid. But dumb, dumb. What's another one my son brought up? Man, it was really good. You have dumb, you have idiot. There's another one on the tip of my tongue, but there was a number of things that were used in the past that went through the same life cycle as certain words that we're experiencing now, that we use now. We say, man, that person's a real idiot, not realizing the historical context of that. You know, do you believe that should be something factored in with certain words that we use now, that we may say, don't use the word retarded, use idiot instead, right? Like, and say that is what they used to call those people, right? Like, people suffering from that was the term. Or dumb, that was somebody who had a disability. And so there's a number of them. And I wish I could call my son down here right now and tell me, because he had another one that is for younger generation people. I said, yeah, dude, that's true. That's totally that. So what are your thoughts? Do you think that applies? Do you think it's something people should even think about? Or is it just like, well, maybe, but it doesn't mean the same thing. Nobody thinks of a person with mental issues when they say idiot now, therefore it's preferable.
So are we talking about as a human being, or are we talking specifically about
as a writer,
creative writing? Okay, I just wanted
writing. With writing, we're sticking with that, man. Yeah,
because it's going to be a different answer for depending on which. So, I mean, I'll start by saying I think it's pretty clear that all of our positions are that we are against censorship, but we're for consideration, and the more offensive a term, the more we have to be able to justify it. But there is no word, or there is no action that we say you cannot do that within fiction. I think at the point that you do, then you're perhaps watering down your own art. So I think particularly with a first draft, or even a draft before you hand it into your editor or your beta readers, you have to give it unfiltered. Now, if your editor says there's no way that we can sell this if you have that in, then you've got a decision at the editorial level. But I feel if you're censoring yourself too much initially, then I think that you're going to have an inauthentic story, and the whole story is going to suffer. So, I mean, when I was chatting with Chuck Palahniuk, he says that if something isn't working, normally he has to dial it up. He has to make it more offensive, or he has to make it more grotesque, or he has to go further. He has to make it darker. So I certainly don't think at that initial level you should be really censoring anything, not on a conscious level. I mean, you might unconsciously, you're going to go through some different words. It's like, okay, am I going to call that person the R word, stupid, an idiot, a buffoon, if I want to be really comedic and it's a stuffy character, and just going through those different choices. But I think, so your specific question is whether in writing, what we can call people an idiot, because if you look at the origin of the word, then it was once as offensive as the R word. Well, I think was once as offensive is key here. If it isn't in the current context and the current times, then if that feels authentic, and I think authentic is what it often comes back to. What is the most natural thing that this character is going to say? If it's idiot, then I think, put the word idiot into the dialogue and into the manuscript. If you were to worry about And I don't know, because you're on a podcast, how careful do I have with what I'm about to say? But
Right.
but you know,
Yeah.
people me on Zora before. Hopefully, I would like to hope that they have an understanding as to what sort of character I am. But I do think that if you were to worry when you're writing about potentially offending people and all the possibilities in which you could offend them, just you couldn't write a story. Because also, I mean, Ricky Gervais has spoken about this, but the offense, the burden is almost this is where I might get into shit, but the burden is on the person being offended. And if the person saying the offensive thing, if their intentionality being good and positive, then it feels it's about looking at character, and this is sticky territory that we're getting into. And
I do know what you're saying, though, Michael.
Yeah.
Well, I think that, and I think it's a good thing. It seems like all of us are in agreement that, you know, whether writing or speaking or anything, that to be conscientious of that, to fault on the side of being courteous and say, look, you know, I'm not. It's a struggle. It's a struggle in the heart and mind, even for writing, sitting down and trying to write a terrible character. And it should say something of the writer, him or herself, you know, that says that when they're writing that, even if they do that, it's something that they have to process and say, this is why I chose that. And it's not just simply like, yeah, man, I'm just having a blast writing, getting a chance to write all these terrible words. So I think it, you know, if nothing else, it's a little vindicating, maybe.
It is a very strange and interesting concept, given like within our genre, we can skin someone alive and castrate them and go into very explicit detail, but you drop in but we're all so desensitized. I mean, the people who don't like that thing aren't going to pick up the book in the first place. And once stuff starts hinting like, uh-oh, this is a little darker than I thought, then they'll probably put the book down. But a single word can do so much more. And it's psychologically, that's so it's weird. But it's interesting. Like, we have been desensitized to these images, but then if you read a word in there that even if you don't find the word offensive, because a lot of us don't find that particular word offensive for ourselves, but we find it offensive for our brothers and sisters who will find it offensive.
Yeah.
But yeah.
This is after that conversation, we take this cathartic breath. It's like, oh, where are we at?
This is the part where I deliberate whether to add things that can then open up another can of worms. But and this is me pondering where to go there. But okay, fuck it, I'm going to go there. Said we might take offense on behalf of our other brothers and sisters, and I do think you probably know where I'm going to go, but I think that's quite dangerous as well. You know, when we're getting offended on behalf of other people, because then you do almost see this culture of people getting more offended on behalf of other people than the actual people who were supposed to be offended.
Yes.
And I'm just going to leave it at that rather than going into any further detail.
I absolutely know. I absolutely understand, and I agree. Yeah. Where I was coming from meant like in my heart rather than taking action. So let me give you an example. One of my absolute most dearest, closest friends is a black guy. Love this dude to death. He's super close to our family. Loves my kids. He's actually coming back to the States next year just to marry my son to officiate the ceremony. And if somebody called him the N-word, my friend, I don't know that it would faze him. Matter of fact, he would probably walk over to the person and say, "Why are you hurting?
I think I know you're talking about." And yeah, dude, totally.
What's going on? You know, he would not. He would think it was a shame that word was being used, but it wouldn't break him. It would me. I wouldn't say anything, but it would hurt me because I love this guy, big time, and I know how good of a person he is, and that he doesn't deserve that. So, yes, as far as being vocal on behalf, that's a different thing. On behalf of someone who's maybe not even there, which I think is what you're kind of like as though they're defenseless, which I think is kind of what you were headed toward a little bit. But this type of particular example, his reaction would be different than, you know, like I said, yes, it would bum him out that he's, you know, this old and still going through this. And it would break my heart, but he would just handle it differently. He wouldn't let it get to him, and he would just probably go over there and do the complete opposite of what you might think he would do. What that person would definitely think he would do. He told me about an instance recently where he went through that, and it's something he goes through, and it breaks my heart, but I do know what you're saying.
I don't think these considerations paralyzed. They can be paralyzing to a lot of people, you know, and has the potential to be paralyzing to a craft. But at the same time, I don't think it paralyzed the writers of Donnie Darko. The writer of Donnie Darko. Yeah, no, it did not. So that was something like, nah, we're going forward with this, and for all the better for it. In fact, you know.
Yeah, and I don't know who originally brought that up, but I'm so glad because it made for great discussion about, you know, could we have Donnie Darko with that dialogue today? But I do stick with that one line. And you made a great point, Michael, about the position that a writer is in and by writer, I mean the person who wrote the screenplay or whatever, or a book, the writer in particular in you know, video media, with the position that person is in, where they are, if they put that in, it is an influence. You know, you've got a movie like Donnie Darko, where you've got a handsome high schooler that that is charming right off the bat, and you take to him, a very charismatic guy, and then you've got some lines in there that are, a lot of them that are quotable, and that could be one. If nobody you've ever heard that before, because it's so like in your face, that statement at the bus stop, that, and you're so not prepared for it, that we probably all laughed, because it just came out of nowhere that dude said that, and maybe we laughed also because it was so profane for him,
like
to
nervous laughter.
Like,
Nervous laughter.
Oh my gosh, I can't believe what I just heard. Yeah, like
right.
Nervous
Yeah.
Not laughing at her. That's
well, it was unprovoked. It was not only was it unprovoked, but I mean, what was, you know, you can tell that
chick was a sweetheart.
Bullied. Yeah, she's a sweetheart. Yeah. She's, you know, the kind of person that you know, has her own internal struggles, finds herself, you know, away from everybody a lot and real quiet and everything. Even misinterpreting what Donnie says when he says things will get better. You know, that she's, you know, runs away, drops her books and stuff and runs. And he's kind of confused, like he was actually saying something nice about it. Yeah. And he defended her, you know, Donnie did, you know, saying leave her alone kind of thing. And so, you know, but yeah, when I heard it, it was jolting. Let me put it that way. Right. Yeah. It was a jolting moment. And it was also a throwback. Like I sat there and I said, I've heard people when I was little, you know, I'm 42 years old right now. And I remember, you know, being in the 80s, and I had heard people say stuff like that, you know, and so it's been a long time, you know, and I know it still happens. I don't want to say it doesn't happen. I mean, it happens every day, right? There's crazy lunatic jerks out there that say that kind of stuff, belligerent losers. I mean, for all intents and purposes, that say it, but to see it in a film like that, it was, yeah. And I agree about the nature of the conversation on the show.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, Jeremiah, since this is your first and a half time seeing this, I guess, what was your, or at least the first time that you truly remember seeing it? What's your, whether you give it thumbs up or if you give it a number rating or whatever you want to do, what are your?
2.5 thumbs up, bro.
2.5 thumbs up.
Yeah, 2.5 thumbs up, big time. Super dupe, big time. Loved it. I thought there were a couple things in there, and I like it because I like movies that are esoteric. I think that we didn't talk about it at all today, and that's perfectly fine. I don't know if people would have liked it as much as what we talked about, but to say, there was a lot of Jungian stuff in this. The archetypes and everything that were in this, and the kind of synchronicity within him, and having to slay that part of him so that he's united. The fear and the love are united in the end, and to overcome and to sacrifice himself on that altar. Debates about predestination and free will, right? Huge stuff. Awesome soundtrack. I loved the songs, and I liked when they talked. I saw an interview, and I wish I remembered her name. There was an interview where they were asking about the selection of the music and the images, and they admitted what I think was an obvious thing if people are, reading the lyrics in the subtitles, or not in subtitles, in the subtitles, that if they're reading that, they're seeing that the scenes really do go along with the music, that the music was brilliantly selected in a way that it was fitting, not only in the sound and kind of the attitude of the song, the tempo and everything, but also lyrically, and you have that not only in the beginning, which is kind of a foreshadow, right? That the song that I referenced earlier, but also the song at the end, right? The dreams I've had of dying are the best I've ever had. Mad World, right? And this is the movie is Mad World. I mean, it's like, and so you have this song that if you look at the lyrics of that and you listen to the lyrics and you're matching it up with what was there. So there was so much that I really liked. And there was only a couple things that I thought were a little bit weird. I didn't understand the significance of the black chemtrail looking thing, right? That was floating in the sky and it looked like there was a tornado and he's going home kind of thing. Like, how did that transpire? Yeah. I didn't put it together. And the idea that when the fear and the love came together and he became the whole man, which was after sex, right? So after sex is when he sees into this kind of portal and he sees his destiny and what this is all about. And he realizes midnight and he says, we're running out of time. We got to go. And there's like the whole gang, like just jumps on a thing with him. Like they knew what he was talking about. And I'm thinking in that setting, that wouldn't make any sense. I'd be like, I don't know what he's talking about. I'm at a party. You know what I mean? We're going to Grandma Death's house. What? Why are we doing that? And so, I thought that was a little weird. But overall, and I loved the Evil Dead reference, which I think underscores, and I need to throw it out here again because he brought up some really good points. Jay Dyer from Jay's Analysis talking about the Gnostic dynamic to this and how even Evil Dead, right? That they were these shells of a person, and they're kind of these what did he say? They're vectors or something like that. I forget what the term that they used when he was talking to the teacher. Okay, when he was talking about time travel, saying that we're basically these shells, and even in the imagery again of the liquid looking wormy snake thing coming out of people. And stuff. And so I felt like there's so much there that people could debate, even the debate that takes place in science over whether or not, again, it's free will and predestination again, but the idea that emotions precede reason. And so to use Jonathan Haidt's imagery, he says that the emotions and our nature, it's like an elephant, and our brain is like the press secretary riding on top of the elephant, and it's very difficult, but it's always there to defend the movements of the elephant. And very rarely, so even when you think you're doing something of your own volition, really it's something that precedes the thought process, and the thought process is justifying it. But all of those conversations could come out of this movie. And so on that level, brilliant music, brilliant cinematography, brilliant, especially when he was talking to Frank and it was going in and out of the face. So like it would fade in to a narrow part of his face, and all of a sudden that was Frank, and then it would fade back into his face and it was him. I thought that was genius how they did it. I thought the acting was great. Maybe even Drew Barrymore. I wouldn't say it was great, right? But I would say she was, whatever. The story was great, and I just 2.5 thumbs up, man. What about you, buddy?
I mean, what else can I say? You summed it up pretty well. I love this movie. Liked it when I first saw it. I am not one of these people who need answers for everything. I love ambiguity. I love, absolutely hate being spoon-fed. And so I have zero problem finishing a movie and not knowing the answers. I mean, I'm a David Lynch fan, so you're never going to get answers, even straight from his mouth. But I am disappointed that there's a director's cut that Michael mentioned, and I probably won't watch it. I mean, Donnie Darko is in a movie that I dwell on often and think, I wonder if he's, but when you're watching it, there are things that could point to just that this kid is mentally ill, but I think there's too much outside of that points in the other direction. And that I thought it was neat the way that he is like a martyr to uncover the evil, like Mr. Swayze in his collection of whatever he had in the dungeon.
Dungeon. Yeah.
Yeah. And as well as, even saving lives, like saving his girlfriend's life. So, I mean, I don't need any more answers than that. I'm convinced that this was time travel. This wasn't mental illness. But I love how it was wrapped up together like that. So what about yourself, Michael?
Well, I mean, if we're going for a star system, I'd probably give it 4 or 4.5 out of 5. So fairly high rating, particularly as I rate things rather harshly. And I thought it stacked up really well, rewatching it recently for this. Because sometimes, unfortunately, you rewatch something that you remember being really good in the 90s or the noughties, and it hasn't stood up so well. But I think it was maybe even better than I remember it being, and it does. It seems to work on so many levels. I love the ambiguity. I often sway more towards like a kind of mental health or a narrative that's grounded in realism when I'm presented with the ambiguity. But you are right that in Donnie Darko, there's so much about time travel that even as someone who likes to go with the realism, it's like there's something going on here. There's something otherworldly, but it's so subtle in the way that I love the Twilight Zone for that, and some episodes of Black Mirror. It's the real world, but there's something off, and I think those types of stories really resonate with me and just really work for me. So, I mean, we've discussed it a lot. There are other kind of theories that we could get into, but that would, add another hour or so to the conversation. And as Jeremiah said, that soundtrack, oh my God, I really do want to just underline how perfect it is. Not only the song choice for each scene, but just as a damn good 80s throwback soundtrack. I mean, it's perfect for 80s goth kids, that's for sure.
Yeah. So Jeremiah, I know that you like to pull like, some morals away, something that you've learned or a keen observation that you'd like to share or something like that. And so I'm curious as to what you learned watching Donnie Darko.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I went into my library. I've got a very respectable collection of books about history and anthropology, psychology, and all this stuff, which was very beneficial for all of this. But I took away more than anything. I took away the idea that if I'm ever in a place where you've got a self-help guru video of this guy presenting life in this dialectic of love and fear with no kind of nuance, talking to the camera from about 100 yards away, and ever see anything like that, he probably has a dungeon of kiddie porn in his house. And just as bad, he probably has a terrible painting of himself hanging in his home. And if he ever encourages me to get a painting of myself or to come over and hang out, it's definitely not on my agenda. I am not going to be doing that anytime soon. And so I figured, especially if I see the painting, then I know if I walk in a house and a guy's got a painting that looks like the one that he had of himself, he definitely has a kiddie porn dungeon in his home. And so
then that would mean, based on that logic, do you think that Kramer has a kiddie porn collection? Because Kramer had a pretty cool painting of himself.
This wasn't a cool painting, man. This painting sucked. I don't know who drew that, and I hope I don't offend anybody. But I'm like, when I saw it, it was like burning, and because you see it from a distance, and you see it a ways away, and you're like, oh, he's got a painting of himself. That he's got a lot of ideas about himself and stuff like that. It's massive too. I mean, it's a really big painting. And so, but when it was burning, and you got the flames kind of taking it down, and I saw the picture, I was like, that's like Beavis and Butthead drawing. Like, I love Beavis and Butthead as much as the next Gen X guy, but I'm like, I wouldn't have that hanging in my house prominently. Like, I'd be like, really, is 6'1" of that? Like, I don't know. I don't want people thinking I've got kiddie porn in the back room. I mean, it's obviously a telltale sign. So I don't know, man. But
oh goodness,
yeah. So what about you, man? You got any lessons, dude? Any moral valuations, inspirations, illuminations that you got while watching this?
I guess mainly just an observation and some decision making. If I could go back in time, what I would do if I was Donnie Darko. I tell you what I do. If I don't care how hot she is. If I was out on a date with a girl, I took her to go see Evil Dead, she slept through it, I'd never take her out again.
Yeah, done.
That's the end of that relationship.
Yeah, done, dude.
Deal breaker.
Yeah. How long was I sleeping? The whole movie. That's when you're like, peace. You just fall.
That's right.
It's amazing he even came back. And just been like, she was pretty hot. I mean, I can understand a little bit. And she had the candy still, so you had to go back for that. Candy or popcorn or whatever. But I'm with you, dude. If I was at Evil Dead like that, and my girlfriend was sleeping through the entire thing, yeah, bro, I'm in the wrong relationship, man.
So, Michael, what do you, real quick, what do you got going on? Where can people, reach out to you or find out more about your stuff, more about your podcast, about your books, about even, I'm not even sure if you're doing publishing anymore with This Is Horror, but any of that stuff.
So for the podcast, it is This Is Horror Podcast. So you can search for it on Apple Podcasts and Spotify and pretty much anywhere where there is a podcast. You can even go to thisishorror.co.uk or .com if you want to be redirected because you want an American feel when putting your URL in. That'll work too. And you can search for all the different episodes. As we said, the latest one is with Chuck Palahniuk. We've also spoken to Joe R. Lansdale, Josh Malaman, Stephen Graham Jones, Ellen Datlow, Jennifer Lynch, many, many people over the years. So if you have a number of favorite authors, then chances are, like assuming they're within the horror genre, if you search, then we've probably had some sort of conversation with them. And in terms of connecting with me, in terms of social media, I'm most active on Twitter. So find me at Wilson the Writer. I am on Facebook, but connect with me on Twitter instead because I don't interact as much on Facebook. It's not really much of a source of joy, to be quite honest. And in terms of books, so I released The Girl in the Video, my debut novella, at the end of April. So that is The Ring meets Fatal Attraction for the iPhone generation. So if that sounds good, or if you trust the praise of people like Alan Baxter, David Moody, Josh Malaman, Brian Keane, and Sadie Hartman of Cemetery Dance, then check it out, The Girl in the Video. And then at Halloween, I will be releasing via This Is Horror. So in a sense, publishing is still ongoing, but this is myself and Bob Pastorella, our collaborative novel, They're Watching. And it's kind of got themes of the Wicker Man and Body Double and Kill List. So it's it's an interesting one, if it's not too arrogant to say that about my own work, but it's only half my work, which means I can big it up and praise it a little bit. But no, I'm pretty proud of that one, and I think people are really going to enjoy it. So that is They're Watching, Michael David Wilson and Bob Pastorella. If you want to look at my author website, it is michaeldavidwilson.co.uk. And yes, Americans, you can also put .com in and get redirected.
Excellent, man. Well, dude, thanks a lot for hanging out with us again.
No worries.
It's always a pleasure to talk with you, man. And thanks for, giving us this cool list of the 3 movies and this nice discussion on Donnie Darko and the dark places that it ended up going. Cool conversation.
Yeah, well, we started off discussing Donnie Darko, but then it turned into a discussion on censorship. But I think that's an interesting, a valid, and an important discussion to be had. I think people, it's something that for writers, they probably are mindful of and considering a lot at the moment. But if you try to self-censor, then you're ultimately going to paralyze yourself as a writer and not write anything. So you can't be doing that, at least not in the initial stages.
Right.
Yeah. Let your editors do that. Let the editors do that. And then if people, then you'll have stories to tell above and beyond the actual book itself,
Yeah. Editors, beta readers, but don't self-censor initially.
Yeah.
Jeremiah, where can they find us and listen to us at?
Oh man, they can find us everywhere. They can find us. In fact, I think that by the time this episode goes up, we're going to have youtube.com/PaleoCheeze, because we didn't have a banner. I don't know what we were thinking, man. We didn't have it was tough, man. You worked hard on that thing.
I didn't know the rules.
Yeah, because it was, and so we didn't have a banner. So we were like youtube.com/ and then a whole slew of letter sequence, right? Cryptographers would struggle with. They'd be like, I don't know. And so we had that, but that will be changed. And everywhere else, whether it's Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, all of it, Gmail, all of it, PaleoCheeze. Okay, so PaleoCheeze at Gmail, PaleoCheeze on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, you name it. And of course, they can find us on Acast. Just check out Acast, Spotify, all that. Look up PaleoCheeze and make sure to put a Z in there. Okay. And so, because otherwise you're going to get a lot of these dishes and recipes for PaleoCheeze, right? And interesting stuff. Trust me, I've seen it all. And so
that's all right. I mean, I generally eat a paleo diet. That's why I came on the show. I thought we were going to discuss recipes.
Oh, man.
That's funny.
Well, thank you so much. It's been an awesome time, Michael. And we, of course, wish you the best on everything you're doing, whether it's the book, whether it's all the other things, right? Even stuff behind the scenes that you just continue to do a really great job, and really to impact people's lives in all different sorts of ways, And so we wish you the best, and we're really grateful that you spent time with us today.
All right. Thank you very much.